Are you wanting to start a band but have no idea where to even start? I was in the same boat many years ago. Today I'm going to share with you how I started my band and give you 5 tips so you know exactly what to do to create a professional working band. By the way, I'm Brad Allen. I'm a singer-songwriter and drummer based out of Kansas City, Missouri. I'm a full-time professional musician and I've been leading my own band for over 20 years now. All right, tip 1. Decide what venues or types of gigs you want to play before you form the band. You're going to structure the group around that. And that's why I have a trio primarily. This allows me to play clubs, restaurants, library gigs, small festivals, community festivals, some of the jazz festivals. It's not as expensive as having a larger group. Now, I will say, I also wanted to play private events, and I knew for the private events, I would probably need some horns. So sometimes I do work with a saxophone player, maybe once in a while add a trombone to that. Tip number 2, never rely on any one musician for your group. Be prepared to make changes as necessary. And there's lots I can say about this. I can think of several situations where duos have worked out or partnerships. I think of Kiss. Kiss was primarily Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley. It was really their group. And initially they had Peter Criss, they had Ace Frehley, but when things weren't working out with those other musicians, they were able to hire other drummers and other guitarists as they needed to. And so for them, that's worked. I can think of another situation. I know of a band here in Kansas City. It was a husband and wife that formed the group. They were both musicians. And eventually, the husband had an affair, and you can imagine what that did to the band. So even with the best intentions, or when a situation starts out perfectly, you may have to change members, and you have to be prepared to do that if you want to keep working as a musician. For myself, one of the things that I learned really early on is that in order to work, I had to have some kind of a demo. I had to present a group. And so what I did initially for my demo is I went to UMKC and I had a student do it for a student project who was in the recording program there. And I hired the musicians, to make the demo. And basically I just kind of hired whoever was available. I had kind of regular guys I was working with at that point. So I had already had some gigs before we went into the studio or a studio to make this demo. So I was able to get the guitarist I wanted, the bass player I wanted, and then with the horns, again, I wanted to add a couple horns on there, which would give us the ability to play some private parties. So for several of the tracks I used horns, and again, I just went off other people's recommendations and hired who was available for that. When I play live, it's always a good group. It's always a really good group, but it isn't always exactly the same players. I work with a lot of the same players, but for various reasons, maybe the bass player isn't available for that particular date. I work with who I have to. They're all great musicians. I'm very fortunate because in Kansas City, we have a huge pool of really amazing musicians. But if I had to wait to book the gigs until these guys were available, the guys that I, thought of initially were available, I wouldn't be able to work very many jobs, quite honestly. One of the compromises I made early on, initially I think I was working with a pianist and a bass player. That's kind of the standard classic trio in jazz. And I found out most of the pianists were very, very busy. So I started working with guitarists. And I found out, for me personally, I don't necessarily have a preference, either a pianist or a guitarist. I think as long as they're both great musicians, either one works very well. And I'm very comfortable playing with either a jazz guitarist or pianist. So that's an example of being flexible with my personnel. Tip number 3 kind of goes back to what I was talking about a minute ago. You do need to put together a professional package to present to bookers. Back in the day, that meant an audio demo. Nowadays, you pretty much need a video. You need a professional looking demo or video and maybe a picture. Now, it also needs to sound professional. It's possible to do it yourself if you have the skills or you're willing to learn the skills. But regardless, it has to look and sound professional. So if you need to spend money to do that, that's an investment you need to make. I actually went in the studio several years ago. I spent $1,000 between everything, getting all the players paid, the studio time. I paid someone to do all the video work, the editing, mixing, all that stuff. In the end, to be honest with you, I was kind of sorry I did that just because it was a lot of money to spend. And what I have done most of my career is I've learned to gradually acquire all these skills, the ability to record, the ability to do video. And I would just rather learn to do that myself because for one thing, it's not the last video I'm going to put out. I'm putting out videos all the time now. So that's a skill that I'm really glad that I acquired. Tip 4 is to book the gigs and then call the players. In some bands and some genres, that sounds so ridiculous to them. They don't get it at all. You know, like how in the world could you do that? And especially in jazz, again, because the players read well, a lot of the music is improvised, it's very easy to do that. Early on, I thought I had to have a big name around Kansas City playing with me. So there was a pianist I thought I was going to get to play with me. So I was trying to get into this club, and there was a booking agent in charge of booking the club. And every time I'd get him on the phone, he'd give me a date and say, okay, you can play on this date. I'd call the pianist and he'd say, no, I'm not available that date. I'd call the booker back, and this went back and forth. And I realized eventually that that was not the way to book gigs. And I mean, if you have a 5-piece band and every time you go to book a gig, you have to call all the players first and say, are you guys available on June 28th? Nope, they're not available. Then you start over. That you're not going to be able to work like that. Even in the bands that I know that work around Kansas City that are doing more like pop and rock, those bands can usually sub players. I mean, obviously there's some things that just won't really work. If you have one person who's the lead singer, you're probably not going to be able to replace that singer very easily. Although if that person got sick, maybe so. If they were sick and you knew another female singer that knew all the songs and was willing to learn them, then you could still book the gig and then hire the players. But basically, you know, you have to be able to do that to work a lot. Tip number 5, when you start a new group, avoid telling the bookers that this is a new band. People think people are going to be impressed by that. We're brand new and it's exciting to them. It's exciting to them because it's new. It's exciting to the band. It's not exciting to the booker usually. It scares them. Basically, you know, you don't want to lie to them, but you also don't want to point that out to them. It scares them away. This is, are these guys amateurs? Do they even know how to play? Things like that. As long as you know you can bring them a good band, you don't need to say that. You don't want to lie to them, but just present the group and tell them you want to play their venue and leave it at that. Don't tell them this is our first gig or we're looking for our first gig or something like that. You just kind of have to have some confidence and have the demeanor that, you know, we've been doing this for a long time. If you're a professional musician, you know, when I came to Kansas City, I'd been playing in the military band. I had already been a professional musician for a very long time. But still I was uncomfortable. Of course, you're going to be uncomfortable when you first start booking if you've never done it. You have to get outside your comfort zone. You do something enough and then it will get more comfortable for you. I do a behind the music episode like this every week. It's completely free. Just follow the link in the video or in the comments below to sign up to view the weekly episode. And we'll see you next time.